Khadijah Tribble is an activist and policy strategist on a mission to do good. Khadijah is the VP Social Responsibility for Curaleaf Holdings, Inc. Curaleaf is a leading vertically integrated multi-state cannabis operator with a dominant presence on both the east and west coasts of the United States, the largest cannabis market in the world. She received her MPA from the Harvard Kennedy School in 2018. Upon her graduation, she successfully launched the Marijuana Policy Trust, a social enterprise partnering with the government and the cannabis community, establishing a regulatory framework that works for all stakeholders.
Today we have Khadijah Tribble with us, and she is the VP of Corporate Responsibility with Curaleaf. And just super excited to be with her today. One, because she works for a really influential company. And then two, she has a really influential position within the company. So I was just telling her that, you know, corporate responsibility is a tough job in any industry, but even more so in cannabis. So Khadijah, really grateful for you to be here with us today. How you doing this morning?
I'm doing excellent. Thanks so much, Ulysses, for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to have a talk with you and your students. So yeah, happy
Absolutely.
to be here.
Oh, that's awesome. Happy to have you. So I was hoping we can talk a little bit about your past experience before cannabis, and then kind of how you got into cannabis, and then where you are currently.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just, someone sent me a copy of my TED Talk I did a couple of years ago in the Mid-Atlantic region, and it was the first time I actually watched it. And it was interesting. There's been a lot happening in the last 5 or 6 years in the cannabis space, but I actually come to this work as an activist. I spent the last 20, 30 years of my career focused on anti-poverty initiatives. And the way that I did that work was by working in politics and government relations. I've been the head of nonprofit organizations that focused on increasing health outcomes for individuals from vulnerable communities, meaning children, adults living with HIV, respiratory issues, you name it. I've also spent a great deal of time working on issues of housing. Public housing is an issue that has been near and dear to my heart for a very, very long time. And because I understood very early on with my own personal trials with stability in housing at a young age, how important that is to the foundation building for children. And so you put all of that, the politics, the health, the housing, the poverty issues, back to 2010 or 2012. I don't know if people remember, we were in harm's way in a lot of ways. Even though we had the Obamas in the White House, there were many challenges that communities of color were facing with regards to stability in the marketplace, economics, health, all of that. And I had, I was quite honestly burned out, and I needed to figure out a way that I could continue making a difference and making an impact in ways in which I had not done previously. And so a friend mentioned that the Kennedy School at Harvard had a mid-career program where they recruited individuals who were 10, 20 years into their career and were looking for some more skill sets. So I went to Harvard to retool. And I went there, and when I applied, I actually thought I was going to be focused on the intersection between health and housing, and because I had actually applied before Harvard to an MIT program that I got accepted to, and I spent some time in Cambridge in early 2015 or 16, I can't even, no, it was, 2015. At the campus at MIT, focused on this question of how do we mitigate all of the challenges that were surrounding the reduction in funding for public housing at the federal level, and how local states could actually address the issue of the housing crisis. And so I thought that I would take what I did at MIT, figure out how to answer the question of, what are the opportunities to mitigate harm at the intersection of health and housing. And that's what my application was about. So at the same time, we were having this real loud conversation in this country around social justice and the the space around how we challenge the criminal justice system. And, you know, there were all of these papers being written about the Nixon era and Anslinger and his policy regarding the war on drugs and the intentionality of that policy. And you couple it with my own personal experience with cannabis. I mean, if you look at my TED Talk and all of my works, the written works I've done, I've talked candidly about my children. I've talked candidly about my veteran father and about my own personal use of the cannabis plant. So when I get to the Kennedy School, it hit me. You know, you're at Harvard, you're with some of the smartest, some of the brightest minds, both on faculty and dean. You have the loudest policy stage. Why not do something that you really are interested in doing? So Marijuana Matters, the company that I founded, the social enterprise out of the fellowship that I got at the Kennedy School, was born. And so I got a chance to take an academic approach to policies that have, you know, quite honestly, and I just looked at the TED Talk, and one of the most powerful things that I learned at the Kennedy School was that for all of the gains of the civil rights movement, the Voting Rights Act, fair housing, EEOC, all of those things were meant to advance the cause of African Americans, to level the playing field. And when you look at the war on drugs, what they did was single-handedly reverse, interrupt all of that progress. Because for a marijuana charge, depending on the severity of the charge, you lose your right to vote, right? You lose access to public housing. You also stand to lose access to educational subsidies, like, you know, loans and, you know, work study programs, all of the things that were meant to level the playing field. And so it is not hard to understand the direct connection between the civil rights movement and the policies that came out of that, and the war on drugs being amplified as a way to disrupt all of those policies and the progresses to be made. And so when I was clear about that, then I knew that there needed to be some understanding of the role that government, the industry, and community plays in legalizing marijuana in a way that speaks to the more than 44,000 collateral consequences that individuals face when they are criminalized for marijuana possession. And so that's what, you know, drew me here. And so I spent 2 years after graduating from the Kennedy School focused on amplifying the policy side. And so Marijuana Matters, which is the organization I founded, is still, we employ 6 and a half folks who are working solely in the policy, the political policy, government space, and in the community education space. We are amplifying the message that individuals in the community have a responsibility, that if you support marijuana legalization, then you should be supporting the social equity framework of legalizing marijuana that says that you should be your policies should center those individuals who've had disproportionate impact of marijuana's criminalization, those communities, those institutions. And now I find myself in the industry. So when Curaleaf, who was a client last year, said that they wanted to move in an intentional way at figuring out how this company responds to that question of what is the industry's role in mitigating the harm of the war on drugs. They said that they wanted to do it in a way that put all of the resources behind it, right? Now, I've been an advocate, I think we've talked about this a couple of different times, that marijuana legalization presents some opportunities in terms of the economic argument for reversing some of the real issues of Black wealth. And I think that's rightfully so. But my role here, I have expanded the idea of how the industry should be responding, which includes connecting with communities and figuring out how does Curaleaf in the communities where we are present in terms of our retail location, our manufacturing, if we have any footprint whatsoever in the community, then our role is to ask that community outside of ownership or in addition to ownership strategies and increasing the number of owners from underrepresented groups, what do we and how do we show up? And so that is where I'm spending the bulk of my time right now, is determining what are the best tools at Curaleaf's disposal to address some of those, collateral consequences. And I'm excited about some of the things that we've come up with so far.
That's great. I appreciate that introduction, and we definitely talked about what some of those initiatives and what you've been working on now. Just for folks to know, how long have you been at Curaleaf at this point?
Yeah, it feels like 5. It's only been 6 or 7 months. I came on board officially March 16th.
Right. That's awesome. So, in conversation with some other folks that are in the industry, like outside of Massachusetts, we look at other markets that you guys are in, like Florida, like Connecticut. How do you, in your role, keep up with all that's going on with these different segments of states having different regulations and things of that nature?
Yeah. So one of the good things about being at a company this size is that the resources are available to make sure that we are held accountable for what the states are doing on the regulatory front, but also understanding intimately the impact that those regulations have on the cannabis work that we're doing, whether it's from the retail side all the way across the board to cultivation and manufacturing. So, this company, and I'll share with your students, has many divisions, right? And so we have a government relations team. We also have a legal and compliance team at the corporate level, and also bifurcated at the state level. So our company is set up to actually address and respond to the needs of the state level, at the same time building a national company, which is, it's complicated and it's nuanced, right? And so depending on what's happening in what state, there are hotspots. And in the way that I've approached it, and for anyone who is a student and looking to get into the industry, either as an owner or an entrepreneur, or looking to understand policy impacts, one of the biggest challenges, I think, when you're trying to consolidate resources and to run a business in a way that you can be efficient and productive across your many marketplaces. The fact of the matter is we're operating in 23 states, and there are 23 sets of regulations that we have to abide by. And it's not easy making sure that you stay the course and your company is not in harm's way from a legal standpoint. And we can't forget the Schedule C designation of cannabis. That's always breathing down any cannabis company.
Schedule C, like the Schedule 1, like next to
Schedule 1, my bad, yes.
Got you.
Yes.
Okay, I got you. That makes sense. So, I mean, you mentioned the 23 states that Curaleaf's in, but then even on a local level, those regulations, those bylaws are different. So I look at somewhere like Massachusetts, where there's 351 municipalities, and I want to say somewhere between like 70 and 100 still don't have bylaws. They still have moratoriums. And even in this program at Clark, there are some municipal leaders. So what advice would you have for those leaders that are, looking to come on board with legal cannabis in their local municipality?
Well, I will say this, that, I adore Shalene Title. I think she is a smart regulator. But when I look at how the state set about this plan of making sure that the localities had some level of autonomy, it begs the question for me, was that the right move, right? What level of autonomy should have been given? And, is there a greater role for states to play in making sure that there's a coordinated effort in the way that cannabis is being regulated across the board. I look at some of the other regulatory frameworks and wonder if there's something better we could have done in Massachusetts, just because it has created an opportunity for local governments to be exploited, uh, local companies to be exploited, and quite honestly, the community left to really try to figure out what is best for itself without any real way to ensure that there's some equality across the board to access. And this is not just about the criminal justice aspect of this, just access across the board, the pitting of patients against adult, users is ridiculous. And the fact that we have cannabis users fighting each other in a conversation in Cambridge about how we create social equity is absolutely exploitative and has been damaging, I think, to the cause. So I would say this to local leaders is really understand the intent of what it is that you're trying to do in regulating cannabis at the local level. And, this is my advice to everyone who's working, whether it's on the policy, industry, or community side. We really have to ask the question and center the most vulnerable individuals in our communities to ask, how does this decision point ultimately impact them on the ground? And then move from there to create legislation and parameters, practices, policies, whatever, a township may just have a practice where, the city of Boston has a set of parameters and policies, and center those individuals who are the most vulnerable in those communities and asking, how does this impact them? And then make those decisions accordingly.
That's a great point. It's all about intention, especially for those harmed the most. And just kind of looking back at the scope of where we are as a nation, it's you look at a state like Colorado where it's still like 98% white, white men. Some who have interviewed for this class and are open about like the disparities that exist there. So when is there going to be a point where we see more reparative and inclusive market across the nation, not just in one particular location? And then what does that model look like for reparative justice and reparative model look like?
That's a tough question, man.
It's weighty.
It's weighty, but I'm hopeful, right? Cannabis is complicated, just the nature of cannabis in itself, just given where we are. But I look at these other industries, I look at tech, and I look at healthcare, and I look at these other sectors, and law, policy, politics, right? You name it. And there has been this constant just drama of there has to be more diverse voices. There have to be pathways put in place. Where are the on-ramps? And so I don't know when, but I do know that we are a long way off to having true equity and inclusivity in this industry with regards to ownership, with regards to influence and leadership. But there's some things that are happening across the country, and I will say that you cannot let up. You have to keep pushing. Every answer isn't the right answer, but I am convinced that if we continue to ask ourselves, what's the next best move from where we are now, we're going to be able to make inroads and create those on-ramps.
Who would have the most prominent role in really reversing the roles, looking at local governments, the state, the federal government on the private side? Like who has the biggest influence when it comes to reparative justice?
Wow, it's probably the community, quite honestly. I know that people think it's an oxymoron when we think about bought elections and how much money is in the regulatory process. But at the end of the day, we are a consumer good. We sell a product, right? Cannabis is a product. Just as we have seen consumers take the reign in wanting more organic products, they want to support companies that have environmentally friendly practices. When the consumer, the largest consumer block inside of cannabis says enough is enough, we're going to spend our money in places that value social equity, that value diversity, and actually implement and execute and have robust plans to address and ensure there's equity and inclusion in their hiring ranks, how they spend their money? Absolutely, the consumer base. But that doesn't mean that the industry has to wait to consumers or governments react, right? Some of the things that we have done inside of Curaleaf is say, where is the social equity opportunity in the way that we do business right now? We don't need to wait for the state to tell us to do this or that, or we can do this or that. What can we do? And one of the things that we're doing is, you know, a lot of this influence in terms of legislation and regulation gets done through association. You know, you're stronger when you show up as a group as opposed to one. And so many of these state and local associations are generally ruled by the larger players. So Curaleaf has a role in just about every major state and national cannabis association. So we're putting together in tandem with our government relations team to identify particular associations where we could offer access to waived fees for individuals where the cost to participate may be a barrier, to access to those associations in advisory board capacities where the bylaws don't allow anyone other than a registered organization or someone with a license to be a member. Okay, well, if folks don't have licenses yet, how can we still ensure that there is some voice or some influence at that particular table? And so we're creating advisory board councils where we can to give individuals who are, you know, in line to get a license, to be able to have access to the leadership of the folks who make these regulatory, you know, practices and put those things in place. And so those are the ways in which we're looking at using our influence to create a pathway for social equity applicants and members of the social equity community, and quite honestly, underrepresented communities, to have a voice at the table. So I think there's a role for everyone to play, right? There's a role for industry, there's a role for community, and there's a role for government. And I think part of our challenge has been government has not believed that industry would step up and do its part. So it has overreached in some respects and made things complicated. Like in Massachusetts, the delivery license going just to social equity license holders. On the face, it sounds good, but when you get into the implementation and the execution of the program before the changes that just came down, there was a no-win situation for folks. Who's gonna put all that money into doing what you're saying, and I have no way to really, you know, earn money, make a profit. So I'm excited that the changes have come down. I'm interested and eager to hear and see what those opportunities may present. I know our team right now is looking to see. We've had some discussions with individuals with delivery licenses. How now can it make sense for us? So, yeah.
That's great. I mean, that's a great answer. The consumer is so strong. You make a valid point.
Yeah.
So just shifting gears a little bit, where you talk a little bit about social equity, and obviously we're in some really interesting times when we talk about you know, look at social equity in cannabis, but then just some of the movements that are going on now with like police reform. So where does cannabis, social equity, and police reform kind of intersect?
Right. So it is no secret that cannabis or the smell of marijuana has been used by police to justify pulling individuals over, searching cars, you know, profiling individuals on the street. And so there is an interesting connection, right? So when we go back to how the policies were made, right, that said that this particular plant and the use of this plant requires the most severe criminal punishment, and then justify the police in doing what they do using that policy marker, like that was a policy decision that was implemented throughout the criminal justice and the FDA and all the other kind of health policy places. Like everybody lined up with this idea that cannabis was so horrible. And so we're going to create all these policies to show and prove that it's horrible. And the police use that lever to terrorize communities, right? And so for me, there is a specific connection. And I would love, I don't live in a world where legalizing marijuana is going to stop the police brutality in our community, right? I wish that were so. I wish that the numbers justified in Colorado. They said, if we legalize in Colorado, we will reduce the number of arrests of people of color. And when in fact, we saw a spike for certain members of our community, right? In DC, there was a report that was just released on the number of arrests have doubled and tripled in some respects in communities of color after decriminalization. And so, the connection is deep and it is real, but there are other issues at play when we talk about the policing of communities of color.
Right.
So.
And you mentioned like DC. I look at like areas like Chicago, states like Illinois, maybe a state like Oakland, where it's inherent, these issues that are amongst us. But they also have, especially like Oakland, where they have a one-to-one model. Like, what do you feel is the best kind of model that can help undertake, reversing some of these issues that we have?
I thought long and hard about a model, and what I am clear about is that there is no magic bullet. No, not in terms of how you're going to write it. But I said this earlier when we spoke, that if we are intentional with centering what we intend to have as an outcome, then I think it helps us get there. Like it makes sense in some jurisdictions to have a 1-for-1 model. Absolutely. I could see that it could work. But when you put in a 1-to-1 model and you put it in specific to the retail and you don't put it in other places and understand how that particular 1-to-1 model specifying retail only, how it exploits and puts potential people we're trying to help in harm's way, it defeats the purpose. But I think, devil is in the detail. So, I want policymakers and legal scholars to take a deep dive into the regulatory process and really begin to think about what does a framework look like? What are the things that we are trying to accomplish with the legislation and with the regulations? And then get to, asking these. So if we did a 1-for-1, like in Florida? Florida is a vertical only state.
Right.
Come on. Takes a lot of money to be a vertical anywhere, but definitely in Florida. And so while folks say, oh, that's going to help the social equity community and blah, 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 actually it doesn't. It puts the control in the hands of a few folks who are able to get capital the fastest and spend that capital to create regulations that benefit them, right? And so for me, there is no one model. The thing that I'm going to hammer home consistently is centering the beneficiaries of the work that you're trying to do, and you keep at it. You keep at it and have to keep coming back. I remember Shalene spoke at the Harvard Kennedy School's Black Policy conference a couple of years ago. And one of the things that it was Joy Hollingsworth out of Washington that we brought in. We talked to Kamani, who at the time was in the state working. And then we brought in a group from Canada. And, there were some really, and we had the counselor from Oakland that pushed for the first piece of legislation, right? The 51% that came through. Desi Brooks, Councilwoman Desi Brooks. All of them, they were having this really interesting and robust conversation. And I remember Shalene made the point that, it's not enough and your work isn't done just because you get the referendum. or the legislation, or when you get the regulations, or when you get the practices, or once the license. It is something that is continuous. And we have to have people who are in the space that are focused on the policy aspect of it and the implementation continuously working. But oftentimes what we found for us is that the people who are business owners are also having to become lobbyists and policymakers and everything else just because they want to be in this business. And we have to create social equity lanes for owners, social equity lanes for policymakers, and social equity lane for investors. But we've only been focused in this one space, and that leaves the community vulnerable. We have to have more voices, more input. You know, for a year, I would say, whenever I talk to my activists, my queer activists, my women activists, you care about social justice, you care about equality, then cannabis is your issue. And that's why marijuana matters. That's literally how it came up for me. It matters across the board if you really are trying to have an honest conversation about equity and social justice in this country.
Right. You make a serious valid point when you talk about the different stakeholders, whether it's an investor, whether it's a business owner. I think one thing that's inherent of the industry across the board in all different markets is even just employees. It's tough to, recruit and retain from these communities that have been impacted. So what do you think smaller companies can do that like maybe a Curaleaf or a larger multi-state operator, kind of where to align some of the principles that align with helping, really reverse that or, include or participate with those communities that have been impacted?
Right. And so at the end of the day, I think some of the same principles that Curaleaf is employing and some of the strategies that we are putting into our different models and, right now we're in that ideation stage with some of the work that we're doing. And we're piloting in different markets, different things to address some of the social equity and collateral consequences, right? Everything's not going to work everywhere, right? Franchising is not going to work in Florida per se. It's a vertical it's just not going to work. So where else could that work and where do we pilot that? But to answer your questions for the smaller companies, I think being intentional about your hiring, being intentional about your influence. One of the things that there's a company that is not even plant touching. It's called Hall of Flowers, I think. Maybe it is plant touching. But there's a project that they had because they were trying to figure out how do they use their sphere of influence with the work that they do on a daily basis to increase the representation from groups, from underrepresented groups. And so they actually put on a buyer's fair. And so they selected, I think, 10 brands that normally would not have the financial capacity and quite honestly didn't even know that these kinds of things were happening. They put that brand in front of buyers in California. Like that is game changing for some folks, right? And so I would say, doesn't matter how big or small you are, there should be some intentionality about how you actually practice inclusivity and equity on a day-to-day basis in your operations. If you're a company, you spend money. Are you spending the money in communities that have been disproportionately impacted? Have you figured out a way to engage in that community to use your employees' volunteer hours, right? How do you show up in the work and do you make space for it? So there are a lot of opportunities, and I'll make sure that I get to you. I'll have Courtney from Marijuana Matters get you the toolkit, right? The toolkit was developed for this very reason, for companies who are like, I don't know what to do. Well, here are some things, right? And they and inside each of they focus on community, industry, and government. And they do, in Marijuana Matters team, pull together a case study for each of those stakeholders to showcase, what happens when there's some intentionality, right? Yeah. So I'll share it with you.
Oh, I'd love to see that.
Yeah.
So just on the topic of employees, Curaleaf has a lot of employees. And I think one of the biggest things, kind of looking at the industry as a whole, is just like people setting their career path on being in a position of success. And particularly your position, I feel like it's a position where people can look and say, hey, this is where the company is heading in the right direction from in terms of, just being responsible. And I think that helps kind of boost morale. So like, what experience do you have when it comes to like internal, just making people feel good within your internal, experience being at Curaleaf, and can be useful across, again, any other organizations?
Right. So I had the fortunate opportunity to start Curaleaf at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, and to be followed up closely when this country was having a reckoning with racial issues, right? And so it has been challenging personally, as a person of color. It has been challenging just working in this corporate environment where there wasn't necessarily an infrastructure. There was a commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and a culture of inclusivity, but there wasn't an infrastructure to actually practice, that commitment. And so that's what I built. The last 3 or 4 months, my team and really some really key players inside of Curaleaf stayed focused on this. So we just actually launched the Rooted in Good strategy for CSR, which has 4 main pillars, one of which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is internal facing for the most part. With one exception, we have a supplier diversity program that we are writing and building as we speak, which will be external facing. But internally, we, a lot of people inside of Curaleaf come from the cannabis community and culture, right? Particularly those that are working in retail and cultivation. They're about this life, right? And so they're people who are in this culture and community really do care a lot, right? And they were very clear after George Floyd's murder that they wanted to have their say, and they felt like they wanted to help this organization frame a discussion. And so we developed employee resource groups. We have 5. We have a parents at Curaleaf resource group, because many of our consumers and our employees are also parents. And we felt that it was, they felt that it was important to be able to be a parent in a cannabis industry. And there are a lot of challenges around that, right? Because of the stigmas and the criminalization of marijuana. And then we have a Pride at Curaleaf, which I'm absolutely ecstatic to be a member of. I remember that when I came on board, I requested that my signature include she, her, hers. And folks weren't really clear about what that was, but that was an opportunity to do what my mom, who's a teacher, she's like, there are always teachable moments, and you can always use them. And so, so we have Pride at Curaleaf. We have a BIPOC, which I'm also a member. We're also a Women in Cannabis, ERG. And the last one is the one I always, is the Voluntary and Community Engagement. Which, was really, really shocking to me, because, and not so much because we don't do engagement or don't care about volunteerism, but you don't generally see them as specific ERG groups, but they were emphatic that this was something that they wanted to coalesce around as a national corporation. So I'm really, really excited about that work. And, we've seen a lot of people ask the question, show us your numbers. And I don't know if you know, but we just, integrated with Grassroots. Our deal just went through. And so we knew that acquisition was coming on board, and we did not want to be premature in doing our baseline. And so now that acquisition has taken hold, and we are wrapping up the last phase of our integration of those employees into the Curaleaf system, we are moving on to a phase of discovery in terms of what do we anecdotally we know, right? But what do the numbers say? And what is the qualitative data around that helps us understand our recruitment strategy, our retention, and our promotion strategies? And I'm excited that, 12, 18 months from now, I'm going to have a full report to share about here's where we started, here's what we've done, here's where we've landed. And I think we're going to have some results. I'm excited.
No, that's a big acquisition.
Huge.
Yeah, Curaleaf was already on the map, but that puts you further on the map.
Yeah, it made us a target for sure.
Yeah. So you were at alluded to this a little bit before, and obviously this conversation is more or less on the social equity front. But there are other things, specifically within kind of your role, and I believe it's 4 different silos. I know you started with one of them with
Yeah.
diversity and inclusion. So I was
Yeah.
hoping you can just talk, because I personally admire it. Again, I study it and like knowing like how important it is. So I just for the class and people that view this.
Sure. So corporate, like you said, corporate social responsibility is not new. It is, and it's not always easy, and it's moved from being lip service to really having some meat behind it, right? Meat and bones behind it. And so my pillars include diversity, equity, and inclusion, social equity, environmental sustainability, and strategic social partnerships. And for me, the reason why I fought for those pillars, and I say fight, it wasn't a fight per se, but I wanted to be able to crystallize that there's a difference between diversity, equity, and inclusion,
Right.
and social equity.
Right.
Environmental sustainability is going to be a monster of an issue for our entire industry.
Right.
And Curaleaf has been leading the way in so many different things. And I think it is an opportunity for us to lead in environmental sustainability. So some of the things that we have on tap to really begin to understand a framework for assessing the footprint is the most important thing, because I'll just say it's a lot.
Yeah.
To be in this space. And then to focus on strategic social partnerships. We're not like other companies. Like, everybody doesn't want to partner with cannabis, right? They don't always want to let us play in the sandbox. And so I am clear that equity and inclusion on the ownership and in access to the industry is important, but equally important is the access to this plant. And so, my father is a 26-year veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces. He was in the Air Force, and he is paralyzed, and he has used cannabis for the last my son's 24, so the last 22 years as a part of his healing regimen. And we have fought every year the VA system, which threatens to, take his benefits. And we have to fight for access for our veterans and for vulnerable communities that don't always have access to, high quality medicine.
Right.
And it's not just, for some people, it's not getting high. Some people is, and that's okay. But we have to deal with the equity of access issue, which means we have to destigmatize cannabis for some communities. When I first started at the Kennedy School, I was only thinking about the economic argument of social equity. And I had some conversations with some Black farmers, and they let me know really quick that I had missed the boat, that they didn't care how much money was at stake. They were not going to be growing weed on their farms when they had lost family members. And, they were looking at me like, have you want us to grow drugs,
Right.
sis? That was a nice little spanking on my head. But it gave me the moment. It was like, yeah, this has been traumatic for our families and our communities for so long. And it's not as easy as legalizing and thinking that we're going to reap the benefit. Not so. And so we have to have some strategic partnerships in reframing this plant in communities that have been just destroyed by its criminalization.
That's an amazing answer. And I'm going to follow up and ask, how do we do that? And I'll give you some backstory on it.
Okay.
Because I've interviewed a veteran actually just last week. I interviewed another, kid from Memphis, young Black kid. His father's a pastor, but his father has the mentality that he understands because his son works in the industry. But then we look at municipalities like Lawrence, or Lowell, where like, a lot of these communities, even back home in Bridgeport, Connecticut, a lot of these, local leaders on a religious level are exactly what you just opposing it, right? Where they should be the first ones to say, hey, these communities, these residents that live in this area have been harmed. You know, they should be the first ones to say, hey, we want it. We want it for, you know, for us, right? So how do we reframe that, though?
Right. And so when I talk about the community as a stakeholder, an important stakeholder, this is where this comes in, right? We have to have individuals from the community who understand the potential benefits, right, from an economic, from a health and wellness, from a collateral consequences standpoint. We have to be in those faith centers. Marijuana matters. I hate to keep talking about that, but
no.
I don't think that's a role for Curaleaf, quite honestly, to play. I just don't think that that's the proper role. And so Marijuana Matters is a community-based organization. And before COVID, we were actually in talks with a major church in DC, an AME church. I won't say its name, but you can figure it out, about having a faith and cannabis symposium, right, to bring together leaders of the faith communities in a real conversation with physicians and researchers and advocates and policymakers around a conversation about, you know, let's dispel some of these myths. Right. Let's actually detangle some of the lies that have been put on this plant, all to be able to criminalize Black and brown people. Right. And we have to be able to, as a community, dissect what that means and have some honest conversation. I still think a faith and cannabis symposium is necessary on a large scale. Yeah. I would love for someone from the community to say, hey, we will do this if you fund it. Right. So, you know, but I think it's
about that. I'm all for that. You know, my dad's a pastor. He's a bishop. Okay. They support, my parents support what I'm doing. You know what I mean? So like, I think it is very important to get those to get that, you know, demographic, those communities involved, because they are the ones that have been lied to the most. Like you said, they're, you know, the generation 50 and plus.
Right. You know? They saw firsthand how their literally communities were being shuttered overnight. Right. And not just from marijuana, but from the flood of drugs, right? And the criminalization of, you know, the hyper criminalization. And when you removed all of the major drugs, marijuana became the thing that you lock people away for years and decades from their families and their communities for 5 joints.
Right. Right.
5 joints. Snoop Dogg probably smokes more than 5 joints in a day. So anyhow.
Yeah, no. So just shifting gears a bit, we know that like a lot of that's from the Reaganomics, right? The 70s onto the 80s, and
well, even you know, Clinton, right? Yeah, 3 strikes you're out. I mean, we have to give fair where fair is due, and you know, again, you know, that we from a policy standpoint, we talked about this in some of my courses at the Kennedy School with other African Americans about what responsibility did we have. Right. With our Black Legislative Caucus signing on to bills such as 3 strikes you're out, minimum mandatory sentences, because we didn't ask the question, what if we center the most vulnerable in this conversation, right, how will this impact them? If someone asked that question and continue to ask that question and peel the onion, they might have figured out we might not want to go down this road. Right. Because our intentions are good, protect our communities, figure out how to get the drugs out and those who would do our communities harm out. I get it. It makes sense. But the implementation and the execution, if you knew that it was going to lead to the utter destruction of the communities that you were trying to build, right, come on, would you say yes? And I believe they probably would have not said yes, but we have to ask the question. That's right. Why policymakers and advocates and people like the folks that are in your class, this is your fight. Get in it. In the public health community, don't stand on the sidelines, right, because the stuff that people are cooking up with marijuana these days, you know, I'm not anti it, you know, but I'm an old school girl. I'm just, you know, give me some paper and some flour and I'm good. But, you know, we want to make sure that we ask the questions to ensure that we don't have some problems on the back end.
Right. I had, ironically enough, a state rep who's running back home in Connecticut, stopped by my parents' house they asked if they could put a sign out front. Yeah. And I asked her what her perspective on cannabis is, and she told me it was the opioid epidemic, right? So her priority is focused on cleaning up opioid epidemic, right? So like, thoughts on that, right? Like, are they siloed? Are they one and the same?
I don't know. I mean, one of the things that we have to do, the federal government needs to address this inequity in the state and the federal laws,
right,
so that we can actually be freed up to ask those questions. And the community has to be involved in demanding that, right? And the government has to be complicit to the community demands to want to know, how do we actually understand more about this plant and its healing properties, right? And we can't leave it up to pharmaceutical companies to do it.
right.
That may be where we're headed.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that her rebuttal was really just, hey, we have this issue, why take on another issue? When really the theory, I mean, I know people who have, right, exactly, you know what I'm saying?
There's a connection, absolutely. And, you know, obviously I can't necessarily point to, but I think folks should do their work, do the due diligence, and come up with something. It's not enough. You know, we got to hold our elected officials accountable to be a little bit smarter about the way they approach this, from the federal all the way down to the local.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So on the topic of federal, and this is one of the favorite questions I like to hear, or answers I like to hear from people, especially positions that you are in. Like, what does federal legalization look like? What does it look like?
Quagmire, but you know, obviously Curaleaf is a company that it is in the cannabis business. So legalization at the federal level would benefit this company. My personal views are, if we're going to legalize, then the questions should be put toward the legislators. How do you do it in a way that addresses the collateral consequences of 50 years of a war on drugs, which is tantamount to a war on communities of color? And you have to ask that question. I don't see legalization. I don't see any more state level legalization that doesn't go through social equity. You look at Illinois, and it's just not going to happen. You know, they're going to get social equity right. I mean, they got a long way to go, but you know, ain't going to be no opening up unless you can get this right. So I think my fan just cut off, so I'm extremely loud now. But you know, it's an interesting conversation. It's probably going to happen a lot quicker than I think people may have thought before.
Really?
Beginning of this year. Yeah, I think there are some conversations that are being had that probably were not, they've been fast-tracked in the last couple of months.
Within this next term? I mean, we got elections coming up in November.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, I can't even say about what's going to happen in November, but in terms of the legislatures and the conversations and discussions around cannabis and legalization, you know, we're already, I think, at 33, 34, 35 states with some form of recreational or medicinal marijuana. I suspect that once a major southern state comes on tap for adult use, it's a wrap. You know, there are folks having conversations about, you know, regional interstate commerce, right? So the writing on the wall is that we're having conversations now that even if we don't get federal legalization, we're going to piecemeal federal legalization.
Right.
So.
And you're from Alabama. Who's going to be the first Bible Belt state?
Well, recreational?
I just said some capacity. Well, Georgia has a medical market, right?
Well, yeah, if you want to call it that, yeah.
So let's go rec then. Let's go rec. Yeah.
So I honestly think I wouldn't be surprised if North Carolina came up and decided that they wanted to change, because, you know, there's a big research. Pharma is huge down there.
Right.
And so I wouldn't be surprised. And North Carolina has a lot of land from the tobacco fields.
Right.
And, you know, we'll see. A race for the southern state. I'd love to see Texas do something. Come on, Texas. It's huge down there.
Right.
Imagine what kind of cannabis can be grown.
I mean, Yeah, I mean, even just with the access to sustainability, outdoor things of that nature.
That's exactly right. Right.
Yeah,
A lot of innovation, I think, could be. So.
absolutely. Well, that's game. All right. Well, moving on to the cultural questions.
Uh-oh, the fun part. I
Yeah.
do like an NDA or something. Somebody.
No. This is just this is more personal, less political, for sure. And the favorite part about it, as I was telling you before, is that I know you smoke. I know you with the culture. So, what's your favorite like marijuana or even drug movie of like all time that stands out?
So, this is a funny story. This is a long story. So one of the things I wanted to do at Harvard was to work with the art school to put on a festival that showcased all of the movies and music and video. Like, weed is in everything, right? I gotta say that probably my favorite isn't a movie per se, but it is a TV show.
Okay.
And I know people don't like, she gonna go old school. No, Issa's show, what is Issa Rae's show called on HBO? Oh my God, I can't believe I'm forgetting the name of it. But Issa Rae, when I tell you every episode has a marijuana joint in it somehow,
Right.
with women in self-care and brothers having a conversation, all the ways in which cannabis shows up in this millennial world is being played out in this show that Issa has. I can't believe I'm forgetting the name of it.
Is it a newer show?
It's a newer show, yeah.
Okay.
But I'm sure your students will know it. But if I had to go old school, Friday is one of my favorite movies of all time. And he said, "I'm gonna get you high, Craig. You ain't got no job." I mean, I love it. It's good for the culture, yeah. So
classic, yeah. You're the second person that said that, and I agree. Friday is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
So what about music? What do you?
Oh, sorry about that. Music.
Yeah, music. What are you listening to nowadays?
So nowadays, so I had to go back in my bag. Actually, I pulled out Little Kim. I'm not lying. I listened to the album that she made right before she went into jail.
Wow.
So yeah, so I had to pull that out today. I had to get to my Black womanness. But I am definitely a child of hip hop. So hip hop is a very, very near and dear art form to me. But I'm also into, there's a group called Train out of California, like a little pop, all male, all white male group. I love them. I love their music. I love how it makes people feel. And I also enjoy a little Michelle and Cello. I mean, you can roll up a good joint and listen to Comfort Woman and just vibe out.
Word. That's what's up. So then, how about books? What do you? If there was like a group of books or one book that helped you navigate your career, what would that title be?
Yeah. So I actually wanted to send you a book list.
Okay.
For this particular part of my life, I've spent a lot of time really understanding policy making.
Mm-hmm.
I've understood it from the political side because I had a political company for many years, Ground Game, and we focused on electoral politics and getting right people elected. And so I understood that side of it, right? And a lot of massaging of language in the campaign to transfer into policy making and execution once someone got elected. But Captured Economy is a book that I go back to. I was first introduced to it 3 or 4 years ago. Mm. And then there are some books that I have read that have fortified me as an individual. There is a South African policymaker. She was a minister, Thandi, and her book is called No Longer Whispering to Power. It talks about how when you are in positions to be influential, how do you steady yourself when chaos is all around you? When you're not sure who you can trust, colleague-wise, or even from the communities that you come from, when the things that you believe are true and the way that you're moving could put you and your family in harm's way, and how you do it anyway. It's an incredible story, and it opened my eyes to policy making outside of this country, but also women's leadership outside of this country. And I will say that I think you should always read something fun for yourself, like something you can just escape with. And I tend to be someone who escapes with Zora Neale Hurston. I love the Southern, like every word I know. My wife will read it. She's like, I have no idea what this is saying. I was like, well, let me translate. And so I love it. So I go back to her books time and time again. They're always on my nightstand. I think their eyes were watching. God is one of my favorites, but Jonas Gord is another favorite. So yeah, that's what I do to try to keep my mind together.
Wow. And I don't know why it just popped up that you probably would. I would read a book that you would write. So let me know. Let me know when you're
That's
working.
funny you should say that. I want to write a book about, what it means to be in this industry this year.
Absolutely.
This is an interesting time.
Yeah.
100%. I need to find somebody to help me get to it, but yeah,
I might be able to help you.
Okay, all right, let's do it.
Word. So then back to the cannabis stuff here. So like at what age were you first introduced to cannabis? When did you interact with it? And where were you? I think that's probably the most interesting part.
So the first time I interacted with cannabis, I wasn't consuming. I had to be about 13 years old. And I was visiting a friend, and her father was growing weed in their backyard. Oh. And we were out playing. He was growing weed. It wasn't necessarily in the backyard. He had it in a planter or something, because we were playing near that plant, and he comes crashing out and is like, get away from my plants. What y'all doing back here? I was like, what is wrong with you? And then her older sister explained, that's dad's weed medicine or something, and I don't think I really knew at that moment, right. But, flashing back, I was like, oh, he was growing marijuana. Yeah.
What about smoke? And this is in Alabama.
This was in Alabama, yeah. I'll never forget it. I remember it clear as day. But in terms of consumption, the very first time I had it was probably wasn't too much longer after that. And I was actually sharing with someone earlier that the first time I tried it, it didn't feel like nothing. I went to sleep. I think I was just laid down, but I didn't feel what I thought everybody else is like, laughing and giggling, and having a great time. I don't.
Right.
Yeah. So I just kept trying till I could get it, and then I realized I don't really like back then. Seeds. It just
the Reggie. We call that.
Your chest is burning because you was using menthol paper cigarettes. Oh, awful. Now I mean, the best thing about being in the industry now is having access to good quality weed and in very, very interesting ways to consume. So
let me ask you, throughout your studies at Harvard and even your undergraduate studies, were you consuming?
I don't even, weed is as regular as pizza on college campus, right? I think the only thing that's more present is alcohol.
Right.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Now, I'll tell you, I wasn't ever one of those people that, I don't like to not be in control of myself, which is why today I generally consume by myself, because people mess up my vibe. There's a certain way I like to vibe with the plant, and like sour diesel and Sundays, or is it Sunday Drive? I have got to figure out. I fell in love by mistake. I didn't even realize someone was like, oh, this is one of my new strands. I'm trying it. I was like, oh, okay, sure. I'll take it. And then I used it at home. Like I said, I try not to. I don't mind vibing with people, my people. Right. But I don't consume with everyone. Because right. Everyone doesn't have good intentions and people shady. But Sunday Drive is probably my new favorite.
That's what's up. It's as common as pizza. I like that. No, you're speaking facts, honestly. Yeah. So then what about, I know you talked about you have 4 sons and maybe one of them or a couple of them are in the industry.
Two are in the industry. Uh-huh.
Okay. Now what about your other family, like maybe your parents or, aunts, uncles? How do they perceive your career in cannabis?
So, my mom found out that I had spent my entire academic life at the Kennedy School around marijuana when she came to graduation, and the dean came over to congratulate me, introduce himself to my parents. He was like, Khadijah really helped us think differently about marijuana here on this campus in terms of a policy perspective. She's like, oh yeah. And then she's like, what?
She didn't know? Yeah.
And it's not so much because I didn't, want to tell her I thought it would be an issue or problem. My father didn't have an issue or problem. My father and mom are separated, so they don't, live together. My father lives in Memphis and my mom lives in Alabama. And so my father has, like I said, we've been using cannabis as a part of his regimen for many years. So he wasn't surprised to hear that. My mom, on the other hand, was like, aren't you like the political person in the family? And, I'm, the stand-up one and,
right.
activist. Why are you getting people into drugs? But now she's coming around to the idea that, and I think one of my aunts, right after the announcement that I was coming to Curaleaf, she called me. She's like, baby, I just want to talk to you. I'm proud of everything you're doing. People showing me all the stuff online, on the internet. And but do you sell drugs?
Yeah. I love how the accent comes out when you just tell them.
What I said, yeah. So she's like, do you sell drugs?
Right.
And she called me by my nickname, which I won't repeat. And I was like, I work for a company that is a cannabis company, and it does grow, manufacture, and sell marijuana and related products. She's like, just as long as you be safe. And I was like, okay, I'll be safe. So, people are getting, but I've always been the one. I came out of the, I shouldn't say came out of the closet, but, I came out as a member of the LGBTQ community in my 20s. And, I've been just radical. So they're surprised, but probably not.
Right. Well, more supportive. What I realized is that anyone successful in this industry has support from their family. So it seems like,
It took my wife a minute to get there.
No way. Are you serious?
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. Because, she is, I say to Curaleaf all the time that the Black woman, my wife, should be your ultimate customer because she is an extreme influencer in this community, in our life. They, not to say that, we're going to stop smoking weed if our parents say so-and-so, so-and-so, but in terms of a cultural destigmatization, that when you get her and her friends, the ladies who lunch, talking about cannabis and, oh, have you seen this vape pen and blah, blah, blah? Because that's what she's doing now. Oh, I wonder if so-and-so know about this salve and this cream and so-and-so. That to me was the game changer. I was like, okay, she's there. Took her a minute to get there, But yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, out of all people.
I know, and she's always been okay with me consuming as long as, you're in the back. She's known about our children's, dabble. She's known about my father and even advocated for him, getting it for medicinal purposes. But in terms of me being vocal, a part of a cannabis company and wanting to own and do all of these things and marijuana matters. She was just like, oh, I'm just not ready for all this. So she got there.
Yeah, no, I mean, she has to at this point.
Exactly. But, but to your point, it requires a level of support, particularly if you're from communities that are underrepresented and have had this kind of really difficult and entanglement, if you could, with marijuana, that you have to have people that are willing to help you figure out how to do this thing, right? Is starting a business and you need support, but starting a cannabis business, you need that times 100.
Yeah, that's facts. It's very true.
Yeah.
Oh, so what? Just the last one here, and honestly, like great interview, Khadijah. This is awesome.
Great.
So what's your go-to for strains, variety of weed? I think you touched on it a little bit. You mentioned Sunday, driving.
I need to get with some folks that are going to help me venture out. Because, I like what I like. And, I go to it because I feel what I feel. And I like it, right? And so, but I'm interested. I'm open. So anybody who wants to send me an email, I like creative, I want to be in a zone, right? I'm not interested in going to sleep. I'm not looking for pain management per se, because I have things for that. But, I'm open to some strands that are coming out that, really help a creative vibe, because I'm feeling like, I want a little oomph in how I am moving and operating this corporate space, because corporate cannabis is like a corporation. And you can often get so, upon my excuse the pun, but get in the weeds of what it means to be, doing this business, that you can oftentimes forget how creativity inspires innovation and collaboration in ways in which, if you kind of stick to just the business side of it, you miss all of these little opportunities. And so I wouldn't mind having that, retreat time is coming up for me. So yeah, let me know.
Well, I can definitely be that outlet to help with that. As I often say, when those packs come in after the build out, final license, you know what I mean?
Yes, we have to pop some bottles. Yes.
Of course.
Yeah.
So, and then, and I know this is another just question. You had talked about old school. So your joint edibles, any of that stuff? Concentrate?
Oh man, I love a good edible.
Okay.
One of my friends who grows here in Mass makes this cocoa. And I take it when I'm ready to kind of just look out the window for 3 or 4 hours and just, go to sleep. I love what's happening in this space. I do want some way to have it be standardized. I've been introducing, at least to my friends, the idea of microdosing throughout the course of a day.
Yes.
And so I think that's going to be, because there's a lot of folks who go to work every day and they got these incredible jobs, and if they can find something that allows for them to work and microdose throughout the day that doesn't make them smell like marijuana, and and not that the smell of marijuana is bad, but there's still very much a stigma associated with it, then I think people would do it. So yeah, that's
game.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So one of the things, as I'm looking for ways in which to disrupt the lack of access to information and capital and networks for communities of color. And so one of the things that I thought about is, do our entrepreneurs and business owner have access to consumer data that's being collected and things of that nature in large scale? And if that lack of information is there, if there's a barrier, is there a way for us to help reduce that barrier by providing access points to information in the marketplace to help make business decisions.
Yeah. I think and it's crazy because I teach entrepreneurship at Clark.
Right.
And I tell my students the value in primary data from actually just being super embedded in like whatever culture it is. Right. So I found out that the best information is from being around, me personally, is other people that smoke weed and love to consume cannabis.
Right.
So I think that's where the culture part comes in for the color community, is that like not that it's at a higher rate, but like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like we hang out with weed smokers. So
right.
I think it's really looking at that perspective and putting value to it, as opposed to saying, hey, I don't have this, but like, the culture. So infuse that into what you want to do. Right. And I think that goes across not only just cannabis, but any discipline or any industry.
Right. Absolutely. I totally get it. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So I appreciate your time, Khadijah.
Thank you for having me. I hope I've been offering some stuff that folks can utilize.
The role of corporate responsibility is a heavy lift for any industry within any organization. Now, in cannabis, it's maybe 2, 3, even 10 times a heavier lift, partly because of prohibition, and prohibition, what it has done to primarily Black and brown, low-income people, and even people who are healthy who might need cannabis for medical or medicinal or therapeutic reasons. So with all that being said, Khadijah, existing as a person of color, a woman that kind of, puts herself in the queer community, I think she is the perfect person to work with Curaleaf, to be honest with you. And for her, basically creating this role of VP of corporate responsibility, it shows a lot about her character and her insights and her vision on how the market should be shaped. And, she cares about her cannabis community. She cares about her queer community. She cares about the Black community. And she hits on these different facets. And I think that the future is very bright for what she can provide to the culture of cannabis and the industry in cannabis. And then not only just for the culture, but also for Curaleaf, who they are as an organization. So I support her 100%, and I really appreciate her joining this class, and I hope you guys enjoyed it as well.